Hey, welcome to the Informed Simplicity Project, a place for students looking for the informed simplicity on the far side of complexity. Today I have a great guest, and before we get into that, just wanted to let you guys know, of course, feel free to subscribe, to leave a comment, and if you enjoy this episode, let at least one friend know. All right, without further ado, our guest.
Today, I have a guest that I'm really excited to have on. Um, and I guess I'll let you introduce yourself and we'll get into why I'm so excited to have you on. So give us your name and a brief bio, and then we'll jump into some of these things.
Sure. I'm really excited to be here as well. My name is Jesse Smith, and I am a doctoral candidate in marriage and family therapy. And currently, I work at Drexel University as a project coordinator for the Center for Family Intervention Science, and I'm implementing a behavioral health screening tool into primary care clinics. I run the attachment-based family therapy clinic here called Family Safety Net. I also see clients out of that clinic. I've been here since August. I also supervise master students in the couple and family therapy program here at Drexel. And I've been learning attachment-based family therapy from its founder, Guy Diamond, over the course of the last 9 months or so. And yeah, I'm working on finishing up my dissertation, and hopefully I'll be a PhD by the end of the summer.
Yeah, hopefully by the time that this comes out, I can put Jesse PhD, not ABD, because that doesn't really doesn't really count.
Right.
And tell them how we got connected.
Yeah, absolutely. So I am a minority fellow with the double MFT Minority Fellowship Program. I'm actually a dissertation completion fellow, which is specifically because I'm in the sort of the final year of my uh, PhD process, and so I'm a dissertation completion fellow. And we met because you are my mentor through the Minority Fellowship Program. And so we got paired up, and we've had a few conversations over the last couple of months, just sort of talking about life in the field and sort of, where I am and where I want to go. And it's been really great.
Yeah, I think that you know this, but there's a soft spot in my heart for all MFPs. And so the fact that we're sort of part of this together is like such a, to me, it's like a growing little network of people who are interested in issues of diversity and aren't afraid to have hard conversations.
Yeah. It's like a little sort of uh, society within the field. I think
Yeah.
it feels very sort of like we have a common purpose, like when we get together, like, so we meet basically in person twice during the course of the like fellowship year at the MFT conference. And then there's an institute in the spring. And it really does feel, particularly at the institute, where it's just minority fellows, is really kind of a special place to sort of talk about social justice, and like everybody's research interests sort of align, and it's great.
Yeah. And once you're an alumnus, I always get that confused because it's Latin. And I speak like 20 different languages, but I don't speak Latin, um, at least not modern Latin. Um, um,
I think alumnus is the male version and alumna is the female.
yes, yes. And what's the plural?
Alumni.
Alumni. There we go. Because it's yes, of course, I should have known that. Once you're an alumni, you can also you sort of see that like I get a lot of emails that are directed to MFPs across disciplines
Yeah.
from psychologists. I don't know if you're getting those now. When I was in my fellowship, I didn't get any of that stuff, but when I did, and when I was finished and I was an alumni, um, like social workers, psychologists, MFTs. We actually had a psychologist. He's an MF. He was an MFP, and we had this moment of like, you were an MFP, I was an MFP. Who came on the on the podcast,
Oh, wow.
and so there's sort of even like a little bit of a broader network even among MFPs across this discipline.
Yeah. Well, I wonder because I know that the marriage and family therapy MFP has only been around for, I don't know, like less than 10 years, I think.
Yeah.
But I wonder if they all sort of started at the same time, or if some of the other professions have had it for longer. I don't know the answer.
That's a great question. I have no idea. I guess it would depend on the SAMHSA.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, look, I do want to get into that because students need to know about that. But before we get to that, how did you get into the world of counseling?
Yeah. So for me, growing up, I always sort of I knew that I wanted to go into something in the realm of sort of helping people. When I was a kid, I thought that was like being a doctor. And then I got a little bit older and I was like, oh, I'm going to be a psychiatrist. Because I thought psychiatrists actually did therapy, which
They used to.
interestingly,
They
used to.
used to.
And actually here in Philly, there are a lot of psychiatrists that do therapy.
Wow.
It's interesting because I know that everywhere else I've lived, they just pure med management.
Just writing those scripts.
Yeah. But anyway, so that was definitely like part of it is, before everything else, like I sort of knew that I wanted to go into something related to this. But also, a big part of my story is that I'm a person in long-term recovery. And for me, that means that I haven't used a drink or a drug since January 27th of 2012. And so that journey for me sort of also began when I was a kid. And just sort of, a lot of people in recovery have, there tends to be a high association with traumatic experiences in childhood. And that wasn't really my experience. I think I, as a kid, sort of just always felt sort of different. I really struggled to fit in. I always just sort of felt like an outsider. And then in adolescence, I started to drink and experiment with, different substances to sort of cope with that and also to feel like I could fit in. And it just sort of progressively got worse and worse. And then in 2012, I sort of got to the breaking point and decided to get help, went to treatment, and thankfully I've managed to maintain my recovery ever since. And when I was in treatment, actually my counselor, which this is not super common,
Excuse me.
but my like individual counselor in treatment was actually a marriage and family therapist. And then after I finished treatment, I went back to school because I was in college at the University of Alabama at the time.
Mm-hmm.
And I went back to school and I got involved with the formation of a collegiate recovery community there at the University of Alabama, which is a whole another big thing that's been a big part of my story that I'm still involved with. And the collegiate recovery community is basically, the gist of it is sort of an academic support program for people that are in recovery for substance use disorders to sort of help them to achieve higher education. And so I got involved with that program, and that sort of connected me with Adam Downs, who is a PhD LMFT that was the director of substance abuse services there, newly hired when I went back to school. And he was my mentor, my first sort of MFT mentor there. And he and his wife, Carly Downs, who's also a PhD LMFT, really sort of were the voice of swaying me to go into MFT specifically. Because, as I learned, I sort of had given up on, being able to be a doctor, go to medical school. And then I had tried to look into going into psychology programs. And, when I was using, I wasn't doing very well in school. And so that wasn't really an option. And then, I really felt like MFT was sort of the best fit.
MFTs, they don't care about grades. So you can,
right. Well, I will say that I turned it around and I ended up graduate. I mean, not to brag on myself, but I got my undergrad degree was magna cum laude,
Yeah.
like a 3.8 something.
Yeah.
So, GPA.
Yeah, that's awesome. I mean, all of that is on the one hand, and I hope this might sound really bad. On the one hand, it's like, um, don't want to put you up on a pedestal, because sometimes there are people that can be paralyzing. Like, oh man, I can't not do well, right? Um, so like, you're a person who's done the hard work and and has invested in themselves, and now is investing in other people, like other people,
Yeah.
right? And on the other side of that, whenever people make it through some sort of challenge, it should be celebrated, And so like, there's a kudos that's deserved,
Yeah.
So I want to acknowledge both of those, like, hey, if something happened next week and I don't know, you know what I mean? Like, yeah, you're human. And on the other side of that, like, if you climb the mountain, man, you climb the mountain. Like, that's a good thing. So
Yeah, I agree 100%. One of the things that really bothers me is when people tell their story and then they only talk about sort of the positive things. And, it's sort of like they feel like they have to have sort of a happy ending to their story. Like, they can talk about all of the negative things that have happened in the past, but they have to present themselves in the present as being sort of all together. Right.
yeah.
And I definitely don't want to do that, because for me, I think like humility is super important. And humility, I think a lot of people think means like sort of humbling yourself and bringing yourself down if you think too highly of yourself. But it's also about bringing yourself up. It's about right sizing sort of where you fit. And I think what you were saying of, looking at, okay, yes, there's so much that I've overcome, but I still struggle, and just sort of understanding the balance between those and like where I fit in the world, because that's sort of part of my problem with because for me the substances were first, they were a solution to a problem, and then they became a problem in and of themselves. And so the real problem is something else entirely, and that thing causes me to think I'm either the God's gift to man or like the worst human on the planet.
Yeah.
So I swing back and forth.
That shame pride sort of cycle.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, which I mean, if I'm honest, I go through that at times as well, and
Yeah.
I think you got to catch yourself. Like, okay, reality is I am special to my mom and my son and my wife and my family. And also, in 1,000 years, no one's going to know my name. Like, keeping
Right.
those two things really in balance.
Mm-hmm.
So I've got to ask, man, doing all of that, how come you went more into the attachment-based family therapy world instead of like the addiction world?
It's interesting because I'm still kind of straddling both worlds a little bit. But when I got into my master's program, that was my original thought, right? It was, I like the systemic thinking, and a lot of the people that sort of were MFTs that influenced me were on the substance use side of our field, which is interesting because there's not a ton of MFTs that are like addiction focused. It's kind of a small niche in our field, but I just happened to be run across all of them. So that was sort of my plan.
I happen to run across all of them.
Yeah. Yeah, I can name off all of the like people that do, substance use research in our field, but and a lot of them are MFP fellows.
Which is a part of the fellowship, right?
Right. Yeah.
Substance use.
Yeah, because it's SAMHSA. It's sort of both social justice and substance use, which I think I kind of was allowed to the table because of my substance use research. It just so happens that I also, I'm really committed to social justice. So, but anyway, sort of when I got into my master's program, that was my thought was, it was going to be all, addiction all the time. And I sort of fell in love with couples therapy. It was the weirdest thing, I remember the first time that I ever got into a therapy room with a couple, and it just felt it felt like home. You know, I just felt so excited to be able to sort of connect with two different people and to sort of just dive into helping them to connect with each other, you know. And I think for me, what I've sort of realized over the course of my development is that therapy for me, the reason that I really want to get into it is because I'm really interested in connecting with other people, right? Because I talked about, like, as a kid, that was sort of what I was missing, was that, like, feeling connected to other people. And so I think that was what was so exciting to me about couples therapy, specifically like working on enhancing connection and intimacy and those kind of things. And so I was really attracted to emotionally focused couples therapy.
Yeah.
I saw some videos of Sue Johnson and I was like, this is it. This is ultimate thing, right?
Yeah.
And so, you know, that was sort of what I was thinking. That was sort of like my clinical interest, right? And I wanted to sort of get more training and do more of that. But a lot of my research was still sort of very focused on addiction, recovery types of things. And that's sort of so, you know, I ended up going to Texas Tech for my PhD because the department is the Department of Community, Family, and Addiction Science. And
Wow.
so half the department is addiction faculty and half the department is MFT faculty. And so I went there because of my, you know, interest in addiction. And so a lot of my research is still, in fact, I don't think I have any active research lines for couples therapy, but and most of it is addiction focused or recovery focused. But then, you know, last year around this time, I was looking for internship opportunities because I finished my coursework last summer and I was getting ready to start my dissertation and was looking for an internship. And I actually saw this job description was emailed out to all the MFP fellows, was how I found out about this job opportunity. And so it came out and it said, you know, working on the behavioral health screening, also, you know, opportunity to learn attachment-based family therapy. And the first time that I ever had heard of attachment-based family therapy was at the AAMFT National Conference a couple of years ago. And Guy Diamond was part of a larger workshop that was like looking at different things, but he did a little short intro about sort of ABFT. And I remember being, you know, intrigued by it at that point. And then when I saw this job description, I was like, attachment based. That sounds interesting, right?
EFT, yeah. So
Yeah,
there's
'cause
that
I was
direct
like,
sort of connection.
yeah, exactly. And so I looked into it some more and I was like, wow, this seems like a perfect fit for me and sort of how I view the change process and the kind of work that I enjoy doing. And so, and it was also just a really great opportunity because, you know, Guy Diamond he's a psychologist by training, but he is very much like obviously a, you know, family therapy systemic
Yeah.
person. And so, but along with that psychologist comes a lot more research intensive focus. And so, you know, he's had a long career of getting, you know, NIH funding and doing like large scale research. He's done randomized controlled trials, examining the effectiveness of ABFT, like several. And so I was like, wow, this is a great opportunity to sort of get that high level research experience that not a lot of folks in our field have the opportunity to experience. And it's in Philadelphia. So, you know, I grew up in Alabama and then I lived in West Texas for 2 years. And so coming to the big city on the East Coast was exciting for me.
Yeah. That's a big change.
Yeah. So I packed up and moved cross country and here I am.
Like the opposite of the Fresh Prince.
Right.
Um, that is. Well, I guess the question is, would you see yourself going back to couples therapy, or are you all in on ABFT only now, or?
I think it's sort of expanded my understanding because I think a lot of times we sort of get taught these like few models in our field, and it's like, okay, now you got to pick one, right? And so I think EFT has been very prolific in sort of marketing itself to MFTs. But now I kind of view myself more as like an attachment based, not attachment based family therapy, but just an attachment oriented clinician.
Mission.
Yeah. And so I don't think I've said this yet, but ABFT is geared specifically for working with adolescents and their parents. And it's sort of geared towards depressed and suicidal uh, adolescents and young adults as well. So it is sort of very focused on a specific population. And EFT is sort of more specifically with couples. But I think that they share a lot of similarities and they share a lot of like theoretical consistencies and then also like sort of practical in the room similarities as well. And so I think that's sort of how I view myself as like whatever population I'm working with. That's
Attachment is the lens.
yeah.
Yeah, I felt some of that in that article that you sent me. Um, I was reading through the article, and in both what they reference, because they did reference EFT, both sides
Mm-hmm.
of it, the Sue Johnson side and the Les Greenberg side,
Mm-hmm.
and then also in how they conceptualize the change process, seemed very consistent with um, EFT,
Mm-hmm.
and I was kind of surprised, honestly.
Yeah, I mean, they definitely are very aware of their work and respect it a lot. And there's a lot of cross pollination as well between the two, in terms of like people that a lot of people get sort of trained in both here. Obviously, EFT is a lot more, prolific, but a lot of the folks that I know that have, gone through the ABFT training process also do EFT training. And so there's a lot of cross pollination.
Yeah, I've seen that, not with the ABFT side, but with the accelerated dynamic experiential therapy, AEDP, AEDT. I don't remember off the top of my head. I think Diana Foch came up with that, and it's an individual model. And so I've seen people who want the couples and they'll do EFT, but for the individuals they'll do the AED. I think it's AEDP, but I don't know what the acronym stands for. Anyway, so that makes a lot of sense because the EFT for families is coming, and it doesn't feel as fully fleshed out yet. So I can see
Mm-hmm.
people taking their EFT skills and getting the AFBT, um, ABFT model, and then kind of like going from there if they want to also do family work
Right.
or parent-child work. Um, so this is a great time. Tell us about attachment-based family therapy.
Sure. So, sort of like I said, attachment based family therapy is geared towards working with depressed teens, young adults, and their parents. Um, but it's started to become sort of examined in other contexts as well. Some of the cases that I've seen this year, I had one teen that was sort of more on the anxiety spectrum. Um, we've sort of had, a broad spectrum of presenting problems. But really, you know, I think the core of what attachment-based family therapy is trying to do is have a balance between attachment and autonomy. Because, adolescence is such a critical time for development for teens and for those that are really struggling with depression and particularly with suicidality. um, we find that it's that parents can sort of be they can either be, the relationship with the parents can either be causing the problems, they can be making the problems worse, but then also they can buffer against those problems as well. And so it's kind of amazing, because I think people, I think a lot of the listeners to this podcast are big believers in systems and family therapy as a change process. But I think even for me, but particularly for people that aren't, systems thinkers, it seems sort of counterintuitive to be like, oh, this person is like suicidal. We should work on the relationship, right? Um, but I mean, the results are striking. Like if they do a lot of recording. And so like all the trainings that we do and like the talks that we do at conferences and stuff, we love to show video, because it's just, you see sort of like a first session, and then you see like 10, 12 weeks in, the complete shift in like the relationship and how the parent is able to be there for the kid. And it's designed as a brief treatment. So all of the research studies are 12 to 16 weeks. And there's phenomenal results from just a 12 to 16 week treatment that also hold up across time. So they do follow-ups, and they, at like a year follow-up, are still maintaining those gains.
Wow.
And we're talking about like severe cases too. We're not talking about just like slightly depressed. We're talking about highly suicidal teens. And it's really amazing to sort of see the change that it can happen. But just to sort of break it down a little bit, it's in a lot of ways more sort of conceptual. So when you think about sort of a manualized treatment, right? You think about like CBT, or you think about a lot of the, really specific sort of manualized treatments that are like, this is session 1, you go in, you do this, and then
Think of multi-systemic therapy, which can be.
Yeah. So ABFT is a little bit different, because it's really centered more around tasks. So it's like,
which seems to be a direct influence from EFT with task analysis.
Mm-hmm. So there's 5 tasks in ABFT, and they're pretty straightforward. And particularly, so task 1 is typically done in a single session. So, most places sort of require some sort of like intake session. So you would have that, or you might do that sort of in the first 30 minutes or whatever of an appointment. And then this would be sort of like the first session of therapy. And basically the task 1 is called relational reframe. And basically what you're trying to do is sort of create this emotional experience in which you're motivating the parents or the caregivers and the adolescent to agree to work on the relationship as the goal of treatment, which, as you can imagine, is sometimes difficult for teens that are suicidal, for their parents to be like, well, why are we working on the relationship? I brought my teenager here because they're suicidal. And then
Can I tell you a story about that? Did I tell you that I had a friend who worked with Mnuchin? Did I tell you that story?
I don't think so.
I think for students, this will really resonate with them, because that is so hard. I had a friend who worked with Mnuchin for a semester, and he said it was sort of like an honor thing. And Mnuchin came to their school for a semester to work, and they saw like 2 clients the whole semester. Like, what? He said, yeah, man. And this was like 2015, maybe 2014. He said, yeah, well, I had done this. I was so excited. I got this special sort of permission to work with him for a semester. He came up to the clinic, and we had no clients. I was like, but how is that possible? He said, because people don't want family therapy.
Mm.
And I thought to myself, and Minucci would only see people if they came in with their family.
Mm-hmm.
I thought to myself, that's how hard it is, right? Like, um, unless you are unless you are very, very well trained at getting people to buy into that framework on the front end.
Yeah.
Even if you're as good as Minuchin, people are like, maybe not.
That's really surprising to me.
I was shocked, but I mean, that was my own experience doing in-home therapy. If you try to get family involved, and they'd be like, my kid's OCD, just go deal with them. And I didn't have the training. But it sounds like now you sort of have the technology, you sort of have the training to really enlist people on the front end.
Yeah, well, and also, I mean, it sounds like you're saying that they had a difficulty sort of getting people in the door. And
That and keeping them.
yeah. So I think, we don't really struggle with either of those things here.
Wow.
We started up, so the clinic that I've been operating, we sort of started up last October. So it was like it didn't exist, or it had existed before, but it hadn't been around for a few years. And we started it up and immediately started getting calls. And I mean, I think, a lot of that is Guy has a really great relationship with a lot of folks in the city. He was at the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia for 20 years before he came to Drexel. And so the relationships that he has there, I would say that's the vast majority of the referrals that we got were like the social workers and the doctors at CHOP. But yeah, I mean, and particularly I think in working with suicidal teens, it's like parents that have a suicidal kid are willing to do
anything.
I mean, I was fielding a lot of these calls. I was like coordinating the clinic. And so I was taking a lot of the phone intakes. And I mean, these moms in particular are calling around just desperate to get their kid in immediately. And that was sort of something that we offered, was like, we were on the ball, quick. We get people in quickly. Whereas a lot of, resources here are long waiting lists. Yeah.
And maybe that's a big difference. Maybe the population, because he wasn't working with suicidal teens, but he was doing family therapy with whoever came in.
Right.
So maybe that's a big difference.
I think just in terms of a tip for, students that are looking at sort of like how to be successful, I think branding yourself and having a specialization is really important, particularly depending on what kind of market you're going into. I mean, I think in a large city like Philadelphia, if you just say you have some sort of bland statement of, I love, working with, I see sort of the boilerplate Psychology Today
profiles.
Yeah. You know what I'm talking about? Where it's like, I believe that, everyone is capable of being wonderful, and I'm going to walk with you on this journey together through, just like that sort of gobbledygook that people put in there. And I think that turns some people off. I really believe in being straightforward of this is what I do. And I am confident that I can, if this is what's going on for you, I can help you with this.
Here's the problem though. So I'm going to push back on you. The problem is that how clinicians conceptualize problems is different than how clients do, right?
Right.
Because if you say, hey, look, I'm an attachment specialist,
mm-hmm.
and so that's what I'm going to work with, they're going to say, but my kid's depressed. And they're going to keep on looking, or if I say I'm an attachment specialist,
right,
say, but I need couples therapy. I don't know what attachment theory. So I think that's where the rub can really come for people, right?
Right. I'm sorry, I wasn't clear. I wasn't talking about marketing yourself as an attachment specialist. I was talking about marketing yourself as a specialist in working with teenagers that are suicidal, mm-hmm. or working with African-American families, or working with, you know what I mean? What is your specialty, right? In terms of population, in terms of presenting problem.
Isn't that kind of a misnomer though? Because and maybe this is not true, but people like you who are well trained are going to say, look, the through thread of all of this is attachment, where someone else might say the through thread of all of this is motivation. And so they're going to do motivational interviewing.
Mm-hmm.
So your conceptualization of problems in general is going to be based in attachment theory.
Right.
And so as long as it is an attachment issue in some way, then you can work with it.
Right. So, and I 100% agree with what you were saying before about the majority of clients don't care that you're an EFT therapist or you're a narrative therapist or you're a solution focused therapist. Like they do not care. They don't know what that is. And if you try to explain it to them, they're going to just completely tune you out. So I think that if you do try to sort of present the approach that you're coming from, you have to do it in a way that is going to make sense to them and that's going to appeal to them, right? And so, and some people I think do, use some of that gobbledygook language in their Psychology Today profile that makes that case, right? So if if you are an attachment therapist, you can talk about fostering connection, right? You can talk about like the importance of like how feeling like you have a secure base, right, can help you to, with problems, right? So you can use that kind of language. And if you're solution focused, you can talk about like resources and how, we believe, the solution focused therapist believes that, you already possess everything you need. It's just, however it is that you conceptualize problems, I think using language that isn't technical can sort of appeal to certain people.
That's a really fine distinction, right? Okay, so because what you're saying is like, okay, talk about your population, make sure that's well known, because that's what pulls clients in. And then when you talk about how you help people resolve problems, use common language to talk about that, right? So if I work with addiction, right, say, look, I work with addiction. I work with people who are doing this.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, what we know is that people who are in recovery from addiction, they need strong relationships. So that's your attachment frame, right?
Right.
But people know that this is your population so that they can find you.
I think that that's ideal, but sometimes it takes a little bit of time for people to figure out what that looks like for them. Like I still haven't as I said, I've still kind of got my feet in, or I've got my fingers in a lot of pies, I guess, in terms of figuring out sort of what my specialty is. But
well, and I would imagine that well, maybe not. It depends on your license, but I would imagine that you would, if you continue to do the work that you're doing, at some point someone's going to say, hey, my aunt and my uncle are having trouble, can you help them? And then that's your couple side of it, right? And you go, well, yeah, I can, because I'm trained in this or whatever.
Well, we got a little bit off track.
We did.
So, because I do want to kind of just like hit the high points of ABA.
Yeah, so tell me about attachment-based family therapy. So the first task is
the relational reframe. And really in that session, you're sort of starting to try to get some pain in the room. First you do the joining thing, right? You talk about strengths, you sort of connect with the adolescent and the parents, right? You do all of that stuff. And then you work towards trying to bring some of the pain into the room, right? So you're talking to the adolescent and the parents about what's the problem, what's the mental health problem that is bringing them in, right? Are they suicidal? How bad is it? Have they had an attempt? You're just trying to really sort of amplify some of that pain. And then you make this very intentional shift in the session where you start to talk about the relationship. And so you brought the pain in, and then we always ask, this is like the one thing that's like the question that you have to ask. And it's, do you go to your parents when you're feeling this way?
No, they never do. There's like no way that they can say yes to that.
Right. And so then they say no. And then you say, why don't you go to your parents? And so then you're trying to, and it doesn't always happen in that first session, but oftentimes they do sort of say, well, I feel like when I go to my mom, she's too busy. actually, the most common thing, like I think Guy says, like 70% of kids say, I don't want to be a burden. My mom's got so much going on. She's stressed out. She's a single mom, right? She's got her own trauma. I don't want to be a burden to her, right? And so that's the attachment rupture, right? So that's what we're trying to get at, just to use some technical language, right? Like the attachment, what's the rupture in the attachment relationship, right? Which we're trying to get that. And then once we have that, we're trying to increase longing. So we're trying to we're trying to motivate them to want to reconnect. So once there's some pain, there's some, what's the rupture? You try to, amplify their desire to be connected to each other. And then you go for the contract. So then you say, we want to focus on the relationship. And by this point, you've built up this huge emotional experience, and they're going to say yes a lot of times, depending on how you go. So that's the ideal scenario. And it happens. I mean, I've done it. It's amazing.
No, I have no doubt that it works. Because, I mean, I have not done this, but I've done EFT, and it is all about the emotional experience.
Mm-hmm.
So I believe you 100%.
Yeah.
It's just, I think for me, it's still odd that in some ways we can orchestrate these things. To me, that still kind of blows my mind. But
right. So then after that first session, when you get the relational contract, you split them up, and you meet with the adolescent alone, and you meet with the caregiver or caregivers. So, I don't want to get too much into the weeds here, but I would say most of the cases that we see, it's just one parent coming in. But if it's two parents, you kind of have to make a decision of whether you should see them together or separate and those kind of things. But you're splitting the parental subsystem and the adolescent subsystem to meet with them separately. And so task 2 is called the Adolescent Alliance. And that's just the course of meeting with the adolescent alone. And task 3 is the parental alliance, and that's working with the parents alone. And basically what you're trying to do is sort of motivate, you're trying to create it's just extended joining is one piece of it, where you're trying to buy enough goodwill to really push in the next task, right? So that's one piece of it. You're also, with the adolescent, you're trying to get them to put some more language around and some insight into what is their attachment narrative. So you're really sort of building a narrative of what are the things that have gotten in the way of going to the parents. Are there big attachment traumas? Are there attachment, like process issues, right? Like, so the feeling like a burden, feeling like when they go to their parents just tell them that they need to suck it up, right? Boys don't cry, right? They're getting bullied at school. They come home, tell mom, that they're upset. Mom says, just hit them back, right? Don't stop crying, right? So those kind of things, as well as like, more serious things too, right? Like, so a lot of times, maybe it's, one case that I've, wasn't my case, but that I've seen is, the mom comes in with the kid, and the kid feels like mom didn't protect them from an abusive stepfather, right? And they felt betrayed, right? They felt that they were, not protected. And so, we get into all this, right? And so we're getting into it with the adolescent, and they're sort of building up this attachment language as well to sort of talk about these things. And you're also sort of building the motivation to get them to want to talk about it with the parent. Because ultimately in task 4, what you're trying to move towards is having the adolescent share all of this with the parents, and then have the parents respond in a better way, right? So simultaneously, while you're working on that with the adolescent, with the parents, you're trying to do the work to get them to have, you're building emotional experiences for them and coaching them through, just really briefly giving them some psycho ed about, emotion coaching skills and those kinds of things right before task 4. And there's several sort of pathways that you can do that. One is looking at the intergenerational work, and that's sort of the main go-to is when you were a teenager, what was that like for you? Did you have a good relationship with your parents? Were you able to go to them, right? Or if not, what was their attachment?
I like that a lot.
Yeah.
That's really good.
Yeah.
That is really good.
Because if they can sort of, and this is, there's a lot of different sort of presentations too, right? So, you think about different attachment styles and sort of how that plays out behaviorally. But it works particularly well with a parent that's a little bit more harsh. So like that parent that says, don't cry, right? Probably they had a parent that gave them those same messages, right? And if you can get them in touch with what that felt like for them, I've seen sessions where a parent that was so harsh in task 3, they connect with that pain that they felt as a kid and they're just crying the whole time,
Yeah.
And you don't want to go as deep with the parents because it's not about them as much. It's about getting them to a place to be there for the kid.
Right.
And a lot of times we do sort of refer the parent out for their own individual work because, a lot of times the parents have some trauma, they have some stuff that they need to work through.
Yeah.
And we don't get into that too deep, but it can be a really powerful experience for parents.
Is it also a reframe? Because I would imagine that on some level, and maybe this is not true for like I've seen it with severely suicidal people, but they come in and like the problem is that the kid is doing this or the kid won't do X. But if you reframe it, and maybe this isn't the way, but if you reframe it and talk about their history, it's like, oh, this makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
This is because, my parents couldn't respond because of the Great Depression or Jim Crow or whatever, your population is coming from. And so then the problem is history, which makes sense in context, not like the kid. Is that part of the model or is that not?
Yeah, I think it's great if the parents have that aha moment, right? Of being able to connect the dots.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's phenomenal. It's not always necessary though, Okay. You kind of work with what you got,
What you got.
Yeah. And I think some parents are definitely able to make that connection.
You're more looking for them to touch into that pain so that then they have empathy for the kid.
Right. You're trying to, particularly if they're harsh, you want to soften them. Right. And so all of this is sort of building towards task 4, which is my favorite, right? It's the enactment, right? And so really in task 4, what you're trying to do is have a corrective attachment experience, right? That's sort of the main goal here is have the kid talk about some pain and have the parents respond in a way that is attachment, is helping them to feel safe and secure, right? And validated. And so that sometimes goes really well from the beginning and sometimes it does not, right? And you're trying to stay as hands-off as possible. So it's really more about trying to, be a coach. So you're trying to have them, talk to each other directly. And so, mostly you want to be interacting with the parent and you're trying to coach the parent on how to ask questions and how to do it. And it's sometimes a struggle, but then, you repeat that. And so task 1 is usually 1 session, but the rest of the tasks are just sort of based on like when you get to the point where you've completed the task, right? So it can be, a couple of sessions or longer.
So then you have markers for what is a completed task? Is that how that works?
Yeah. So like basically in task 2, you're trying to get to a place where you feel like the adolescent is motivated to actually talk to the parent. They have some language to talk about that. You feel like they trust you enough to sort of make sure that they're safe. And in task 3, what you're looking for is, do you feel like, I mean, a lot of times it's just sort of, you're done with task 2 and you feel like you've gotten as much done with the parent as you can, and you just go with it. But you're wanting them to be a little bit more in tune with some pain, a little bit more empathetic, have a little bit more insight and ability to regulate themselves, have some skills, right, to be there and validate the kid. And so that's sort of what you're looking for with task 2 and 3. And then in 4, right, you're trying to have them sort of talk about these attachment ruptures. And that can go on for several sessions. And then task 5, which you don't always get to because of time, right, is about promoting autonomy. And so throughout the first 4 tasks, things are coming up, right? So, parents will come in and they're like, the kid is failing out of school, or they're, having unprotected sex, or they're, skipping curfew, or, whatever it is, like all these kinds of things that are coming up. They got to apply for college, right? We got to figure out where they're going to college, how they're going to pay for it, right? So these are all things that we sort of put in the parking lot for task 5. So,
Wow. Okay.
So that's what Dr. Levy talks about, is like putting things in the parking lot. So Suzanne Levy is the training director. So she does almost all the training for attachment-based family therapy. She's phenomenal. Highly recommend going to one of her trainings. But
I mean, you've almost sold me. You really have.
Yeah.
But I probably will go when you're doing the training, because I'm sure that's going to happen soon. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, hopefully, I'll be doing the training here before too long. But yeah, so you're putting all these things sort of that are the nitty gritty logistical things that you got to address, right? The parenting things, the kids' autonomy things. Those are all sort of topics for task 5. And basically in task 5, it's also the parents talking to the kid, and they're having a conversation about all these things, and you're sort of continuing to help coach the parent to do that in a way that's consistent with, emotion coaching, trying to understand the adolescent's experience first, right, and then go into problem solving. And
connect, and then what's the acronym, or not the little pithy phrase that people say? Connect, then redirect. Like always connect first.
Right. And that's it.
Wow. It sounds awesome.
Yeah.
I've got to ask this question, and you can feel free to not say this at all. Is there any like connection in this model to you? Because it's like at the beginning you're like, yeah, I was doing this thing because as a adolescent, like I was struggling, and then you're working with struggling adolescents. Is that a?
Oh, you mean like, do I connect with, like, would this have been helpful for me as a teen?
Yeah, I guess.
I mean, 100%.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, I think, with my parents, like, there was some attachment ruptures there, and I think, just about anybody, adolescence is a tricky time, right? I don't think anybody feels like well, some people do. I'm just speaking from my own experience. I think a lot of people in our field in particular, I think that's why we're sort of drawn to working with families, is because we've had difficult experiences with our own families, right? Yeah. And so I think there are people that have great families that, they feel connected throughout adolescence. But I think I definitely would have benefited from that a lot.
You ever get the sense that complete amnesia, it's gone, it'll come back to me, a little bit. Well, man, that sounds great. Where do you guys do it trainings? Is it all over the country? Is it mostly up in Philly? Is it?
Yeah, it's actually international. So there's a lot of like um, the Maudley Hospital in London is actually very has partnered a lot, and they mostly work with eating disorders, but they've adopted ABFT as sort of their uh, training, or I mean their family model for working with families. There's actually a new contract with the Newport Academy, which is a national treatment center for adolescents, and that's going to be their even MILU model, where all the staff are going to be working on attachment. But yeah, the trainings are offered periodically. A lot of them. So I think the intro workshop is usually like twice a year, offered locally here in Philly. But then I
And
know
how many days is that intro?
the intro is 3 days for the whole thing. You can also just do day one. So day one is sort of like a lot more lecture focused and sort of going through the model. And then days 2 and 3 are more in depth, examining the tasks and doing some role play and looking at more tape and those kind of things.
And is there like a certification process? Is there just the training process, or?
Yeah, so the certification process is fairly straightforward, and I think for what you get, pretty affordable too, especially compared to some of the other trainings. So, you pay to go to the intro workshop, and then after the intro workshop, you can join a supervision group, and so those are conducted via Zoom and with Dr. Levy, and there's a few other people that lead them as well, and you present uh, cases of your own that you're seeing, usually with tape. You get feedback, and then you do that for a while, and then you can go to the advanced workshop. So the advanced workshop is also 3 days, and in that workshop, you really get into sort of like the more complex issues and different kinds of problems, and what are the really things that you're struggling with. And then after the advanced workshop, you can continue in your supervision group, but then you can also start to submit certification tapes. So there's an adherence measure, and you complete the adherence measure on a tape for a particular task, and you send it in for review. And then they review the tape and give you feedback on the tape, and you continue to submit tapes um, and get feedback. And when you submit enough tapes, I think it's 10 is sort of like the minimum, then you can be certified. And what they're looking for is sort of you can do you do an adherence measure, and you write it up as if you're like, okay, well, this is what I did, but here's how I would do it differently. So you're graded on, you don't have to have a perfect tape to be certified. It's
Right.
you just have to know what you could do differently to more closely follow the model.
There you go. Has this changed your viewpoint on individual therapy?
Has it changed my viewpoint on individual therapy?
Yeah, like I mean, some people find themselves going, look, we know relationships are super important, whether they're the cause or whether they're the buffer. Um, and so like I only do relational work. Other people still say, hey, look, I work with individuals because of whatever. I mean, has this changed you?
No, I definitely don't feel like I wouldn't work with individuals because of this. I think, in fact, even in the context of learning ABFT, I've definitely done a lot more, or I not a lot more, but I've definitely still continued to do some individual work. Um, and so I think for me, it's like, it's you work with what you have, and the reality, I think it was Whitaker that like refused to work with a family unless every family member was there, right?
Yeah, And then like
And-
later in life, like even like 3 generations, like I have
right.
to have 3 generations.
And it's like, that's so unrealistic, you know, like that's just not the world we live in. And I mean,
No.
if you really want to help people, you have to meet them where they're at. And not everybody can get a family, you know, not everybody can have their family members come in, you know?
Yeah.
Particularly when you're working with underserved populations, you know, there's a lot of resistance to therapy. You know, the population that we work with here, because we're in West Philadelphia, we work and we, you know, operate at no cost, you know, we're no cost therapy. We work with a lot of African American families, and there's a lot of skepticism and a lot of uh, pushback on therapy, you know. Um, and so I think, you know, particularly, I think a lot of fathers, you know, even when they are, you know, in the home, um, sometimes they aren't willing to come into therapy. But that's, I mean, that's not across the board. In fact, you know, I only have a few cases right now, and one of them is the father and son, and the mom won't come in, you know. But I think, regardless, you know, in any population, I think there's people that are really skeptical about therapy, and so you can't always get them to even get in the door for you to try and convince them, right? I call them up and or I go out to the car. You know, that's another thing is like sometimes they'll come and just sit in the car, and we'll go out there and talk to them and say, hey, you know, why don't you come in here for a little bit? Call them up and tell them, you know, hey, you know, kid would really love it. You know, it'd mean a lot to them if you came in for a session, right?
Yeah. No, I think that's very, very true as well. That's something that I've been struggling with in my own sort of practice. I'm getting clearer on it, but trying to figure out where clients are, you
Mm-hmm.
know, holding to what I think is the ideal, but also, you know, realizing where clients are
Right.
and working from that reality.
Yeah.
So, well, man, look, we're about to start winding down. What are you reading now? What's on your bookcase on your nightstand? Do people still put books in their bathroom? I don't know if that ever really, which is disgusting if you think about it. But
Yeah. So I'm actually really into this new book. It's the author is Tony
yeah,
Rusman. Do you know who?
yeah,
I told you
I
about
want to
this.
have him on. Yeah,
Deliberate practice.
Roseminary. He does the
Rosman. Yeah.
the deliberate practice guy.
Yeah. Deliberate practice of psychotherapy. I'm big into that. I think, you know, I haven't really had the time since I've been working here to do this, but I think, you know, wherever I end up next, I really want to monitor outcomes and be more intentional about doing that kind of work. I actually listened to a previous episode where I can't remember who it was that you were talking to, but they were talking about the
It was
monitoring.
either Scott Miller or Alex Vosh.
I think it was Scott Miller.
Yeah.
Yeah. I really want to get into that. No, but it's super cool because I'm actually, so I'm going through the certification process for ABFT, and instead of submitting tapes, because I work with Guy Diamond and we already have time set aside for supervision, I'm getting the very rare opportunity to get certified sitting in a room with him reviewing my tape. So every week we go through a tape and we sit there together and watch the entire, you know, an entire session, and we stop it and talk about it, and it's incredible. I mean, I don't know if anybody's ever had, you know, like, or not anybody, but most people don't get the opportunity to sit down with a supervisor and go through an entire session, right? Sometimes if you show video, you'll show like little clips, but the experience of going through an entire session and just breaking it down with a supervisor is incredible. I've identified so many more areas that I can improve as a therapist, just like asking the same type of question over and over and over again, instead of sprinkling in different types of questions, right?
Yeah.
I never realized that.
Like you have grown by asking the same question over and over
No,
again?
sorry. Like that was something that I found out about myself as a
Wow.
therapist is that I always asked the same kind of like feeling questions, right? So I
Mm,
would ask, like, well, how does that make you feel? And variations of that type of question over and over and over again, instead of asking, you know, other types of questions, relational questions, questions about content, just sort of mixing it up, right?
yeah. Yeah, man. I've watched tape for a while, not as much as I need to, and I have decided to go full force into it. And I've got a new camera. I've been using a GoPro, and then I'm gonna get but it's a buddy's GoPro, and I'm gonna watch even more tape and get back into it. And you're right. I think it's the way everybody in our field who's, in my opinion, an actual master, they are watching tape.
Mm-hmm.
They're watching tape. And I don't think that there's a way. I mean, I think it's one of the. I have a buddy I've talked to about this, but I think that with our ability now to watch tape and the understanding that we have about people, in 20 years, the people who are master therapists will be, um, what they will do will appear to be magic to the rest of us.
Right.
Um, and I'm glad to know that you're on that same path, because like,
Mm-hmm.
and to me, that's really just exciting. It's cool.
I think it's super critical.
I think it is. Have you ever, this is something else I'm thinking of doing. I'm thinking of watching tape to look for tells with my clients,
Mm.
you know?
Like when they're feeling a certain way or when they're lying or when they're what?
Like, so most of my work I do now is with couples. And in session, I can usually tell out of the corner of my eye, like how the other person is responding. But I
Mm-hmm.
think by watching tape, I will be able to better see how they're responding partner I'm, to the partner I'm working with, right?
Right.
So if I'm talking to, I don't know, I'm thinking of a case specifically right now that I think it's a little dicey. It's an older couple, um, military family, right? And is very, the wife can be very critical, and I don't always catch it. And so I think by watching tape, I can tell on the front end, oh, these are her cues. These, she does this, just like you would in a poker game.
Right.
And then knowing that after watching to the tape, I can go back into session and be more attuned on how to handle that when it comes up.
Right.
Um, so I think that's the other, like obviously looking at myself and seeing what am I doing? Am I following the model? Is my own stuff coming up? And then also sort of watching the client's responses and seeing how they're responding, and then pre-planning sort of like mini interventions or micro moves.
Right.
So have you thought any about that or?
No, I think that's really interesting. A lot of the time when I'm watching tape, I'm more interested in myself
Yeah,
and
which is what I've done.
right. But I think that's interesting, particularly like in a situation like that where you feel like there's something happening in session that you want to understand more and sort of cut off early, right? Because I think that's what you're saying is you want to pick up on what are the you know the signs leading up to something, so you can sort of intervene early, right? And
Right. Yeah.
yeah, I think that's phenomenal.
Okay, man. Last question.
Okay.
What do you see as on the frontier of the field?
So I think what we were just talking about is one thing. And a piece of that is clinical outcome monitoring. So I have a buddy in my cohort, Nick Hayes, PhD. He just defended this semester.
Woo,
So
woo, woo.
congrats to him. He's graduating soon, but he successfully defended, so he's a doctor now.
Wow.
But he took a job at a substance abuse treatment facility in Nashville, Tennessee, as like their clinical outcome monitoring specialist for like the whole company.
Wow.
And I think that is sort of like the cutting edge. So like he talks about it like when you're looking for a surgeon. So he has a son that had to have brain surgery when he was like less than a year old. And so he talks about like when he was going through that process of finding a surgeon, surgeons like publish data on themselves, right? They're like, I have a 99% success rate or whatever it is. And they have all these stats, right? And he says that's going to be the future of treatment centers. That's going to be the future of individual therapists, right? Is that we're going to track all of our outcomes. And because, if you think about it, it's like, how do you know that you're, like it's all the stuff that we're talking about deliberate practice, but it's also like going to be a huge shift for consumers too, for clients to be like, oh, wow, this is a great therapist. And I think it's going to really push people to work on improving, right? So I think that that's the future, is like we're all going to be, crunching stats on ourselves.
I like that. For a long time, I've thought that in the future we won't have evidence-based models. We'll have evidence-based clinicians.
Adrian Blow, that's his catchphrase.
Really?
Yeah.
I need to talk to this. I've never heard of that. That was
because he's a big common factors researcher. Yeah. But the last workshop that I saw him at, that was his big push. So that's where I got the Bruce Manieri book recommendation, was from him in this workshop where he was talking about that, of how treatments are all basically equal.
Yeah.
But there's huge variability in
clinicians,
the effectiveness of clinicians. And so that's his thing, is that we shouldn't be talking about evidence-based treatments. We should be talking about evidence-based clinicians.
I think that would do a lot for the field. And it's almost in some ways becoming easier. I mean, I'm amazed. I actually feel a little self-conscious about this, but I'm amazed at how many of my clients come in with smartwatches.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And it's like, and I don't own a smartwatch, but apparently they all do. And it's like, okay, that thing is always collecting data on you. Yep. So it's not that much harder to develop an app for therapists and track people's physiology and then have them do a 4-item questionnaire on their watch when they're done, mm-hmm. And then you have the data, and then where they were triggered, if they were flooded when they left, how they thought about the session. And it will take them, 2 seconds in the car to go, yes, my therapist was attuned. No, we didn't deal in what I wanted to deal with. Overall, it was fine. You know what I mean? Like, and then you're done. Like, it doesn't. Right. It's just it's getting so easy now that,
yeah, it's like you can take all of Gottman's like heavy duty research and it's going to be automated.
That's what blows my mind is, Gottman is a hardcore researcher and such a math nerd, and he worked so hard to get the data that he got. And in 10 years, it'll be like on your wrist. Like it won't even need
Right.
Yeah. Okay.
Man, he's probably not upset about it. I think he does pretty well.
I think he's doing fine. Well, look, Jesse, I've enjoyed this so much, man. Thank you so much. And man, we should do this again sometime.
Absolutely.
Okay.
I told you I want to start my own podcast.
You didn't tell me that.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, yeah, man, we should definitely talk about that. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Talk to you later.
All right.